Who's coming in late to make sure that they get all the questions today? Hello, hello, hello. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's a seat right in the middle here if you want. So, I think we've got pretty much everyone. Good morning for day 2. How did it all go yesterday? Research done, completed? Yes? No? Anyone still suffering from hangover that they are unable to speak or hear me? So, first and foremost, how many people actually followed the tips? Because I gave one very subtle hint as to how to do the ECHR problem that you are going through this week. And if anyone figured out what the easiest way of researching this year's problem might be? Sorry? The handbook is the most sensible way of doing it, but not the easiest way.
Finding the similar case in the practice of ECHR.
A similar case, correct. Practice of ECHR, less correct. Which article? You said to read the article. Oh, no, that's difficult. That's not shortcutting it. This year's compromise is based on the 4th European Human Rights Moot Court competition. How many people went back and actually looked to see what the 4th Human Rights Moot Court competition in 2015 was about? You've got the compromise, and I said that you always have sample memorials from the winning teams. How many people went back and actually looked at what the sample memorials for the winning teams had said about this issue? Smart people. You have decided to shortcut your way. Not the best way of learning how to research, but if you have an easy way of doing it, stick to the easy way first and then expand on it. In this week, you have 4 days to do a comprehensive piece of research. Why not find every little bit of help you can get? And the same thing happens with Jessup. If you have an issue which has come up in a past memorial, you look at the past memorials. That's already there. They've done the research for you. They found the best arguments. And someone has said, this is the best memorial. This is the best arguments, the best way it could possibly be written, or one of the best ways. So don't shy away from finding shortcuts. I know this is not what you want to hear or what you're supposed to hear, but shortcuts don't always hurt. And in real practice, you will do those exact shortcuts. But back to today's task. We're talking about writing now. And I said yesterday's research and today's writing all have very, very, very similar issues at hand. And we talked about Article 38. Does anyone now understand why Article 38 is important?
Because it gives all the main ends secondary sources of law.
Secondary, it gives all the sources of international law. We didn't expand too much, but it would be useful at this point when you come to writing to actually know why we talk about Article 38. Whenever you're making a piece of research or you're writing something, it all comes back down to what is the value of something that I'm using.
To the order.
Sorry?
To the order. What we...
Almost exactly, yes.
And then
Correct.
from treaties to the decision.
Spot on. So when it comes to researching, your highest priority is to find the most applicable treaty. Secondly, to find custom. Thirdly, if you're desperate, you look for general principles, but you rarely would apply it. And finally, if you have nothing else, you use supplementary means, which is random decisions that you can find. So I heard someone yesterday mentioning, do we use ECHR cases when it comes to this piece? Yes or no? Yes. Of course we do. Why? ECHR cases are not binding. They don't set a precedent. The same in international law. ICJ cases or any cases don't set a precedent. So why do we use it?
Because
Just
it's
to
each
integrate the law.
Sorry?
To interpret the law.
Interpret the law?
because ECHR itself referred to its previous decisions.
Exactly, and exactly. It's highly persuasive. ECHR does not deviate from its past decisions. Where it deviates, it tries to formulate it in a way that says, we're not really deviating. This is a very different issue or a nuanced issue compared to the last time. ICJ does the same thing. It does not deviate from its case law unless something happens. One perfect example for ECHR is women's rights. Now, the way ECHR has avoided saying we have taken an entirely different approach in the last 40 years is by saying margin of appreciation is applied differently. Now, margin of appreciation is a very specific ECHR issue. We don't need to go into too much detail about it. I don't even understand it fully myself. But it's the idea that you have a decision from ECHR or ICJ. If you have a similar case, ECHR is going to rule exactly the same way in 9 out of 10 circumstances. That's why it's highly persuasive. That's why it's useful. So when it comes to writing your memorials, what you have to do is find your applicable law. Research it first. When it comes to actually putting it into practice, you try to use the same hierarchy. If you have a treaty, that is your primary source. If you're able to find custom, that is your primary source. And then the rest of it, if you have some journal articles that follow at the end, they're the third or fourth footnote that you usually use. It's not going to be the first one. But we're jumping ahead of ourselves. So, how to write a good memorial? No one knows. All you can do is follow some basic sets of logic and then hope that it all sticks together. As a matter of, and at the start we're going to talk about Jessup because this is Jessup Summer School, but a lot of the stuff is going to equally apply to the ECHR case that you're doing this week. You have rules. Someone in your team needs to know those rules. The rules set out exactly what has to be there, in what format, what shouldn't be there, and wherever applicable, word counts. From the cover page, you have rules. Top corner has to be a team number with an A or an R. If you miss that, that's a point lost. Has to set out who the parties are. If you miss that, that's a point lost. You cannot deviate from the rules that have been set out at all. So someone needs to be responsible for hammering everyone over the head. This is not in accordance with the rules. This is not in accordance with the rules. You have the cover page. You have your table of contents. Don't worry about writing this down. If you have someone on your team who is supposed to know the rules, that person is supposed to be able to know exactly all of these things. You have your index of authorities. Then you have your statement of fact, summary of pleadings, main pleadings, and the prayers. Does everyone know what all of those things are? I would be surprised if everyone does. Does anyone not know what all of those things are? We can go home then. So, cover page is obvious. Then you have your table of content. Table of contents, Microsoft Word has a fantastic function where you can just select the various things as headings, press a button, automatically puts all your table of content with the page number right at the start. If you haven't used this feature before, play around with it because you don't want it to be 11:58 at night trying to figure out how the hell to fix your table of contents. So make sure that you're prepared for it. It takes 10 minutes to figure it out, but in that last minute pressure, it will take hours. Your index of authorities. Usually, they divide it into a number of headings. All you need to do is borrow from a previous year's memorial as to what those headings are. I can tell you what a sample of suggested headings would be, like treaties and conventions, UN resolutions and other documents, international cases and arbitral decisions, municipal cases and decisions, so on and so forth. It's useful to divide up your index of authorities. Now, you will laugh at me when I say this, but anyone who has done Jessup will understand. It will take you at least a day, if not two, to fix your index of authorities. It's a time-consuming task. Everyone underestimates it. And if you end up missing your memorial submission deadline and submitting it 2, 3, 4 hours late or a day late, in 75% of instances, it's because someone didn't realize how long your index of authorities is going to take. You should be aiming to not do this last minute because it's time-consuming. You have to go through every footnote on every page, figure out what is there, and then put the page number in front of the source that has been used so that someone can look at this case law of, let's say, Nicaragua, and then see that it's been cited on pages 4, 6, and 12. I'll come to the shortcuts at the end, because not all of this matters a hell of a lot, and you can make mistakes. Other than index of authorities, you then have your summary of facts. Summary of facts is going to be limited by word count to present the facts to the side that you're arguing. So your applicant memorial, everyone knows that you are required to produce 2 memorials, one for the applicant side and one for the respondent side. And both of them each is supposed to be around 12,000 words, I think last time I looked. Your applicant facts are supposed to highlight the facts which are relevant for the applicant's case. You can't shy away from the facts that are not helpful, but by and large you will be relying on the facts that are helpful to your case. Same with the respondent. So the 2 sets of summary of facts are different. It would be good advice to say that within the first month or 2, write down your summary of facts. Everyone will know the facts at that point. There is little specific time pressure that you will feel, so get the administrative side of things over and done with so that you don't have to worry about it later on. Then you have your summary of pleadings. This is just a high-level summary of what you are saying. Obviously, you cannot have your summary of pleadings until you've done your pleadings. So, has to wait. Pleadings is your main section. Now, pleadings is difficult because it is the biggest part of it, and that's what we're going to spend most of the day talking about. Then your prayers for relief are almost entirely copy and pasted from your compromise. There are also little other things. So, for example, you might have to include a standard statement of jurisdiction at the start to say that the ICJ has jurisdiction. If you have a jurisdiction challenge in the compromise, you have to address that. So you don't necessarily have a jurisdiction to consider all issues. You have jurisdiction to hear jurisdiction before you consider the remaining issues. The best possible advice I can give you is look at the past memorials. Not all of them will necessarily be identical to yours or relevant, but it will mean that you can have a good idea of what goes where and how it should be worded. Some of the things, like statement of jurisdiction, you can almost entirely copy and paste from a previous memorial. Simple as that. However, how to write a good memorial? First and foremost, timeline. Jessup Compromise is released around mid-September. As much as research is excellent, and as much as you want to do research, you should not just research. You should put something on paper. Anything. Even if it is atrocious, write it down. I used to always say you need to go through at least 3 or 4 drafts before you get to the final piece. And always tried to have the first draft by about middle of November. It doesn't have to be long. We used to say 2,000 words, which is very, very small. 2,000 words per person is tiny. It's the equivalent of about, 3 or 4 sides of A4. Given how much research you would have done by that point and given how much you can talk, it's not a lot. But at least you've got something down on paper. Once you've had that start, it becomes easier to amend. But until you sit down and write it, you won't realize how difficult it can be. And that start is always the most difficult part. There are 2 main things you should always do. One is your structure. You would be wise if you do a almost tree diagram of this is the main issue, this is the sub issue, and on each one of these I have sub issues. That little tree diagram is useful not just for your written submissions, but also for your oral submissions, because it will give you an idea of how the entire thing is going to be fitting together. From day one, establish with your teammates how you are going to label these. Again, it's these little things that will drive you crazy at the end. If you have gone on with the formatting which says A, 1, 2, and they've done something entirely different, that means someone at the end will have to manually change everything. And if there is a mistake, you will be annoyed to no end, the fact that something else has crept into the middle of it. So establish from the outset your naming convention. What's going to be your level 1? What's going to be your level 2? What's going to be your level 3? The reason I say this is going to come in handy for your oral submissions because you want to have that kind of a broad idea in your head so that you have an idea of where you're going to go in your submissions and how you're going to move around within your submissions. Everyone's so quiet. Everyone so far understand that this is simple stuff. Yes. Has anyone actually had to write this kind of thing before, other than previous Jessup competitors or previous mooting competitors? Maybe. No. Some people have, some people haven't. It looks a lot more daunting now. It gets simpler. So, you have an idea of your timeline. Your first draft is going to be done by about mid-November. Hopefully, everyone will submit their drafts. Your second draft is going to be, I don't know, maybe just before you break for Christmas, sometime in December. And then your final draft will be early January before submission time. You want to leave at least a week, if possible, before submission time when your memorial is completed, because then you can get people to read it. And they can give comments, whether it makes sense or not. We used to have a professor who would always read it, but unfortunately, she would only sit down and read it when we would ask her about 4 times, and it would be 48 hours before the submission deadline. And she would come back with significant changes, saying this bit of law doesn't make sense. She was a professor of international law, as luck would have it. And then we'd have this last-minute panic of, do we now change the entire submission? If something like that happens, no. You tweak it, you amend it, but do not completely overhaul your memorial. It is easy to lose marks on style. It is equally easy to pick up marks on style. You have a benchmark of 50, which is the starting point of your memorial. Does anyone understand that? So your memorials are not going to be below 50, ever. The scoring is from 50 to 100. And something like 20-something points is just on style. Just having the ability to follow the rules. That's all points you're going to pick up. If in doubt, I'm trying to see if I can find somewhere on my emails a copy of the Jessup memorial scoring to tell you the exact breakdown. Fantastically slow internet doesn't let me actually open it. See if that opens up. Have a look at the Jessup website because a memorial score sheet is there. It will tell you how the breakdown of the memorial score sheet happens. But it is so easy to pick up points on style. If you have done your cover sheet right, if you've done your index of authorities right, if you've done all of these things right, you're automatically going to get a good score. The most difficult piece is the pleadings because you have to have hours of research and then hours of writing, and you're only going to get about 20 or 25 points from that. So it just makes logical sense not to lose the easy marks. How on earth do we now do the pleadings? You've done your research. Anyone think of the key, and it was in your program, idea of how to write a system of writing that is widely recognized? Thank you. Iraq. Can anyone name another one? The second most widely recognized is what is called crack. I know, good stuff. But, so, Iraq is issue. R is rule. A. If anyone is interested, the only difference between Iraq and crack is that you have a conclusion at the start. I personally like crack a lot more. In part because you're not going to use crack because for Jessup it makes no sense to use crack. So ignore it. I'm saying for general exams, when we're writing, it's always handy to have your conclusion at the start. It's how most articles are written. You have the abstract at the start, which actually gives you the idea of what everything else is about, and then it goes on to talk about it, and then come back to the conclusion at the end. But the repetitiveness is not helpful for Jessup, where you have a specific word count. So as much as it might make it easier for the reader, that is what I want everyone to be concentrating on. Issue. Someone tell me, what is the issue in this week's compromis? There's more than one. Violation Article 6, violation Article 8. Perfect. That's your issue. That's your broad, big main issue. Of course, it narrows down on every point to what the specific issue is on that point. Rule, also known as law, the treaty, whatever it may be, Article 6. These two should be very easy. This one is the difficult one. You have to link the facts to the law, or vice versa technically. You apply the law to the facts. And then at the end of it, you come to a conclusion. Now, since everyone is being so quiet, how many do we have? 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 26, 28, 29, 30. Groups of 5 would probably make sense. I want you to come up with any hypothetical you want, have the fact, have the rule, apply it, and then come to a conclusion. It can be about anything. It can be about fairy tales for all I care. It's just the idea of the exercise of write one paragraph which follows all of these. So, let's do 1, 2, actually no, in a group over there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, over there. Sit down together. Same, just gathering groups of 5 with people near you. There are 30 people in the class. I don't know.
Because they're not students.
I know. That's fine. They can help. You're one of them. You're supposed to help. Yes. Later. Have it open. I'll pick it up later. That is... Don't worry if you haven't finished it. It's fine. So, who's brave? Let's hear it. Go for it.
All right. So, everyone knows a fairy tale about a little red riding hood.
Mm-hmm.
So, and in this fairy tale, we have an issue. Woodcutter kills a wolf. The rules that they're going to apply is, first is Article 2 of European Convention on Human Rights, which is a right to life. And the second rule is Article 6, which provides a right for a fair trial, established by a tribunal.
Okay.
A tribunal established by law. So, application. Despite the wolf's actions, woodcutters did not have a right to take the wolf's life away. And therefore, it is a violation of Article 2 of the Convention.
And the wolf's actions must have been established by a fair tribunal, must have been estimated by the fair tribunal established by law according to the 6th article, and in our case he was lynched.
Is that a fair summary? I should have said issue, woodcutter, killed the nice wolf. Fair summary? Second group. I don't know if anyone can actually read, given how tiny this is in the corner. It says, woodcutter killed the nice wolf. Article 2 and Article 6 as your rules. Woodcutter had no right to take life away. Fair tribunal was required to be established to determine guilt. Therefore, there is a breach of Article 2 and 6.
Thank you very much. As a comment. In our case, we consider death of the wolf as a human. Yes, because otherwise a convention will not be applicable though.
Human wolf. Isn't that a werewolf? Okay, let's hear a second group as well first, and then...
So, the issue, violation by Harry Potter of the Article 13 of the degree of the use of underage visitors. Rule. Under Article 13, the DUUW, it is prohibited to use magic outside the Hogwarts until turning 17. Article, right? Application, sorry. Harry Potter has conjured Expecto Patronus spell against Dementors in the pressure of Muggle, being 16 years old. According to the case of Ministry versus Black, the use of underage wizardry by pupils having turned 17 constituted violation of Article 13. And conclusion. As the actions of Harry Potter are similar to those taken by Mr. Black and proved by the court practice to be a violation of Article 13 of the DUUW, applicant submits that Harry Potter has violated Article 13.
Very good. One minor point. Black versus Ministry of Magic, or Ministry of Magic versus Black, wouldn't that fall under the rule that you're applying? So the application is that given custom set under this and given Article 13, there was a breach. But the actual case itself would be the rule that you're relying on.
Objections, Your Honor.
Go for it.
I read the book, and there is an exception from this rule in the case of danger to life. So
We're going to come to that.
Harry Potter was danger of life.
Anyone else want to give us a third example? Not keen? It's fine. We can do two. Let's hear a third. Just to hear it. I won't write it down. Go for it.
We have the issue. The government of the state A has violated the Article 9 of the EEC chart. Our rule is freedom of thought, conscience and religion. It's Article 9 of the EEC chart. And the application is Raja Salim is handicapped. He hasn't access to the mosque. And because this building has not been adopted to the people with disabilities, so he can practice the religion, his religion. He passed through all domestic judicial instances, but he didn't win any of the conclusion. It's compensation of the legal fees and moral hurt for the adjustment.
That was an analysis of the position. I wouldn't have, for example, said the conclusion is the refund of fees. Not quite what I would categorize as conclusion. The conclusion I would have said probably is that in this instance, the freedom of religion was not applicable for the circumstances, yada, yada, yada. Therefore, the court decided in terms of redress to just offer the fees to be repaid. So that's the only minor tweak I would have made, that the conclusion is not quite the refund of fees. But you have two very good examples. Come back to the first one. So you have a werewolf who's been killed by the woodcutter. Everyone agree that that is a simple enough set of facts, given the background of Red Riding Hood. That's the issue at hand. Make sense? Rule. Article 2 and 6 of the European Convention. Simple enough, yes, that's the definition of a rule. It's a law which is set out in a treaty. It's like drawing strings, pulling it out. Yes, so you have Article 2 and Article 6 of the European Convention of Human Rights. You now need to apply it. And I said application, or as some would call it, analysis, is the biggest piece. And it is also the piece that most law students decide to skip. Because you, of course, have a wolf which has been killed, or a werewolf which has been killed, and Article 2 says right to life. Done and dusted. Simple as that. However, as much as your application or analysis was fantastic, there are a few things. You picked up one. First off, in order for ECHR to apply, it had to be a human. So that's piece one. In terms of application, the wolf is in fact human. Therefore, ECHR applies. Secondly, where does the wolf live? What is his nationality? Any thoughts? I don't actually know. What's the origin of Red Riding Hood? Is it a Swedish story? French? Thank you. So, the wolf is a French citizen. As a result, given that France is a ratifier of European Convention on Human Rights, the wolf can raise a claim before the European Court of Human Rights, and the European Convention of Human Rights applies to Mr. Wolf. Thirdly, you come to Article 2. So you have to first establish that, yes, actually, he can rely on European Convention, and he can go to the European Court. Woodcutter has taken his life away, and that is in breach of Article 2. However, can a state be responsible for the actions of the woodcutter? Everyone is mumbling, I think, the same thing. The state is not responsible for the actions of the woodcutter unless it mandated those actions. And therefore, under Article 2, it is not necessarily the state's responsibility. So, the woodcutter have to be potentially an agent of the state or mandated by the state. That's for application of Article 2. What's the difference between Article 2 and Article 6 for that application? Fair trial rights. In order for Article 6 to be applied, the state does not have to be having a hand in the murder of Mr. Wolf, but rather natural justice, meaning that it would have to be about the courts. The state has to provide adequate legal system. Come on, guys, this is not me telling you exactly. Everyone knows Article 6 is about the court system of the country. So long as the country has adequate legal system in place, then it would be sufficient. Which would be a question of, why was Mr. Woodcutter not brought before a court for his actions if he wasn't acting on behalf of the state? Or alternatively, given the line of argument you guys took, he was acting on behalf of the state. And the state failed to follow due process in terms of ensuring his right to life has been protected. Thank you. You don't have to actually expand on the conclusion beyond that. It might be handy, especially where you have a protracted analysis, because your analysis can go into a number of paragraphs. At the end, your conclusion can be a little bit more succinct. Rather than just saying there has been a breach of Article 2 and a breach of Article 6, admittedly, you would actually split this into two arguments. Breach of Article 2, the application and the conclusion separate. Breach of Article 6, the application and the analysis separate. And as a result, you would have conclusion 1, conclusion 2, and then finally at the bottom, your overall conclusion. In summary, there has been a breach of Article 2 and Article 6 of the ECHR by the state. But when it comes to breach of Article 2, you would actually specifically say Article 2 has been breached because the state had no right to blah, 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 blah. Second example, Harry Potter has used underage wizardry, which is illegal under Article 13 and established in Black versus the Ministry of Magic. Analysis. Your analysis was he used magic. This was very similar to the fact set of Black and Ministry of Magic. Therefore, it's a breach. We heard a challenge from somewhere over there. What's the challenge?
Is the possible exception?
Thank you. Your analysis must include your possible exceptions. So, as much as this is your application, you have to be mindful that that's your headline. There's a breach. However, be mindful of exceptions. What is the exception? You are allowed to use magic underage if there's a threat to life. Was there a threat to Mr. Potter's life? That becomes a separate fact set. Dementor is probably a threat to life. However, you need to get around the exception. So what is your way of getting around the exception? That exception only applies if you are the only person who is able, in those circumstances, to remove the threat. In this instance, Mr. Potter could have relied on the Minister of Wizards, the other magicians and wizards in his surrounding circumstances to call for help so that they would be coming to his rescue to get rid of the Dementor threat. So, where you do have instances, and this will happen again and again, for every rule there is an exception, there is a however. You need to dismiss the application of the exception to the rule. Sometimes this is referred to as a presumptive rebuttal. You predict what your other side is going to argue. We'll come to this in a little bit more detail in the second half of the class, but wherever there is an exception, where you have to prove something, the other side will be trying to disprove it. They're not exactly going to be able to disprove the fact set. They're not going to be able to disprove the rule in most circumstances. Sometimes if you have a rule, let's say a custom, they can disprove the existence of the custom. Or they can disprove the application of the custom in the way that you're intending to apply it. So sometimes you can have the rule under challenge. But by and large, you will have the application under challenge. And the application can be best challenged by relying on the exception. Does that make sense to everyone? Yes, no, maybe. There's some nods, some people just falling asleep. Okay, we are on the hour mark. So again, 5 minutes. Think of this, let it sink in. We'll come back and we will carry on with the whole IRAC method and the little nuances in about 5 minutes. I was corrected in that break to say, as much as I mentioned it, this is the broad idea of the IRAC method. However, the IRAC method is supposed to be applied for each and every subsection. You have the entire compromise, which is Red Riding Hood, and the woodcutter, and the wolf, and everything, and everything, and everything. IRAC isn't just going to be applied in terms of the overall picture. You have your broad structure of trying to get to the point of breach by the state. However, that is subdivided into at least 3 separate sections. Section 1 would have been issue of admissibility. Issue 2 would have been breach of Article 2. Issue 3 would have been breach of Article 6. And even in those sub-issues, you would have sub-issues. So, admissibility, we found out that there are at least 2 sub-issues under admissibility. This is where I was talking about your structure. So in effect, you had A, admissibility. Under admissibility, it's okay. We haven't really got much further. Under admissibility, you would have had 1, application to Mr. Wolf. And then for this, you would have applied the IRAC method to say, the facts are, the wolf is human for 26 days out of the month. For 2 days, he becomes a wolf. Therefore, 26 out of 28 days we submit that is the rule of what it is to be human. Application, 26 days out of 28 days being human is sufficient to constitute as a human, and therefore ECHR would apply to him. Conclusion, ECHR applies to him. Secondly, Mr. Wolf is French. France is a signatory and ratifier of ECHR. Mr. Wolf is a citizen of France. Therefore, in conclusion, ECHR would apply to Mr. Wolf. He has a right to bring a claim before the ECHR. This is your issue of admissibility, and you apply IRAC to this one, and you apply IRAC to this one. B. Now that you have established admissibility, you move on to arguments under Article 2. And again, under arguments for Article 2, you would apply the IRAC method to say, the issue is Mr. Wolf was killed. Rule is, under Article 2, everyone has a right to life. Application. Mr. Wolf was killed unlawfully by the woodcutter, who is acting on behalf of the state. In conclusion, there is a breach. And then you come to C. Article 6. Under Article 6, you again effectively have 2 arguments. Woodcutter as agent of state. Secondly, failure to adhere to due process, also known as fair trial rights. So first off, because he is acting on behalf of the state, and again, you apply the IRAC method. Woodcutter was acting on behalf of the state when he killed Mr. Wolf. The rule is, under Article 6, the state failed to follow sufficient fair trial rights to find guilt of Mr. Wolf before killing him. In conclusion, state has breached Mr. Wolf's rights under Article 6. Now this is what is referred to as your alternative argument. Why do we have an alternative argument here? Because the fact set is not conclusive. We do not know whether the woodcutter was acting on behalf of the state. As a result, you have an alternative. If the woodcutter was not acting on behalf of the state is still in breach of Article 6 because how? Well, what is the due process that the state failed to follow? Clarify. Expand.
They didn't charge other party.
Correct. The state failed to adhere to Mr. Wolf's due process rights, or rights, because it failed to adequately follow up in terms of prosecuting or potentially prosecuting the woodcutter. So regardless of whether he was acting for them, there is still a breach by the state who did not adequately bring the woodcutter to justice. That is your alternative argument because your facts are not there. Does that make sense? In effect, you're applying the IRAC method on each of these subsets.
Why isn't the second argument the first, since the second could possibly be applied in both cases, whether or not the first works or not? Why isn't the second argument?
That's a good question. Goes back to yesterday's point. You always lead with your strongest argument. Regardless of whether he was acting on behalf of the state or not, there is a potential guilt. So this is where you will spend countless hours debating with your teammates. This alternative argument as was stated, does not rely on the fact set that woodcutter was acting on behalf of the state. So it would seem easier to prove. As a result, you might end up doing don't forget, and this is what I mentioned earlier, admissibility jurisdiction always comes first. Doesn't matter what it is, it's always the first issue. Why?
Because if it's not admissible, the court could just draw the entire case.
Yeah, it would be wasted effort to go through all of this and then at the end of it say, oh, by the way, the court can't actually make a decision. So, admissibility and jurisdiction always come first. But between these two, you might end up switching it at the end, saying, this is an easier one to prove. So, what we're actually going to argue is, not Article 2, then Article 6. We're going to argue Article 6 first. And we're not going to argue this one. We're going to actually argue Article 6, due process, first. And then Article 6, agent, second. It's a valid way of doing it. The counter-argument to it would be, which is the most grievous breach? Article 2. Article 2 is always going to be the most egregious breach. So why not go with the worst thing that the state could have done? In terms of how you would do it in real practice, you would always do Article 2 first. In terms of how you would do it for a moot court competition, you would actually go with your easiest argument first. So in this instance, you're absolutely right. If it was a Jessup problem, you would lead with this. Because regardless of the factual circumstances, you don't have to prove it. You can just say, regardless of anything else, the state failed to adequately prosecute. In addition, because he was acting on behalf of the state, there's also these problems. So, good point. That is more about structuring your arguments for the purposes of leading with your strongest argument and then going on to your alternatives and your weaker arguments. And it may not even be possible to win some points. You would always have those right at the end because your expectation and hope is You won't have to argue them. But sometimes it is inevitable that you have to have weak arguments. What do you do when you have weak arguments? Do you have them? Do you not have them? Let's see, show of hands, if you think weak arguments should be included in your memorials.
No, just like the sub-arguments.
No, entire arguments which are weak. You can? What determines whether you include them or whether you concede them?
If the person arguing opposite you includes it in their memorial, if they're arguing that, you could have a counter argument.
The amount of strong arguments.
Sorry?
The amount of strong arguments.
Not quite, not getting there.
The possibility of other party to use it.
Doesn't matter necessarily. At the start, you always figure out what arguments am I running. Your secondary is what arguments are they running in order for me to respond to those arguments. So the whole presumptive rebuttal arguments. But determining whether to run an argument or not is important. The main question is, do I have to? At any instant, always ask yourself, do I have to run this argument? Do I have to? Comes in other things as well. If it is a point that you have to make, you have no choice. Even if it's a weak argument, you have to include it. Because not including it is a sin. If your prayer for relief says, and often the reason you have to run weak arguments is because your prayer for relief demands it. If your prayer for relief says, you are, let's say, in this case, the respondent. Mr. Wolf is not really a human being, and therefore cannot benefit from the protections under ECHR. Now, given that he is a human being for 26 days out of 28, given that he has been recognized as a human being, he has been given French nationality, French citizenship, French passport, how likely are you to win on the argument that he is not a human being? Yeah, you're not going to really win it. Do you have to run it? Absolutely. Because your prayer for relief asks you to argue admissibility on the basis of his, not nationality, what is it? Whether he's human, his species. And of course, given that it's an admissibility argument, it has to come first. So the first thing you have to do is, the start of your memorial, he is not a human being. And then you have to come up with some kind of a clever argument. Wherever you don't have legal arguments, what is your backup? Thank you. You argue on the facts. You argue that it has not been proven that he is human for 26 days out of 28. Because whilst Mr. Wolf runs rampant for 2 days and everyone sees him, no one has recognized him as a human being in the 26 days. No one even knows what his real name is. Or, if his real name is Mr. Wolf, that is an admission that he is more wolf than human. His French citizenship has not been proven. You have to rely on weak factual arguments. But sometimes you have no choice. And when you're relying on factual arguments, what is your best weapon? Mentioned yesterday. The applicant is trying to prove him to be human. You're trying to disprove that. What do you say? Thank you. Mumbled along. Burden of proof. It is for the applicants to prove, because they are trying to give him ECHR rights. It is for the applicants to prove that he is human. The applicants have failed to demonstrate that he has citizenship, or whatever it may be. Sorry? No? So, whenever it comes to it, first and foremost, going back to this entire exercise, Iraq is the most important thing you always have to have in the back, second most important thing you always have to have in the back of your mind as you're drafting anything. At the same time, you have to bear in mind that you lead with your strongest arguments and you don't ever make weak arguments. We used to have a different strategy in the past. It didn't pay dividend, which was throw every argument in the memorial. You don't have to plead it. But the better approach is include only the arguments which are good, because it gives you credibility. However, as I was just saying, sometimes you have no choice but to include the weak arguments. We'll come to how you would deal with oral presentation of these things tomorrow. But in the meantime, just as a heads up, do you have to argue everything that is in your memorial? Yes, no, I don't know.
No.
Of course not. You include a lot in your memorial, but you don't argue it. Do you have to only argue stuff that is in your memorial? Can you suddenly invent a very smart argument on the day? Of course. You're not bound by your memorials. In real practice, yes, you are. In Jessup or in any moot court competition, you're not. That's just a matter of practice because your memorials are submitted in January. The competition happens, the national round sometime around February, the international round sometime around end of March, start of April. In that time, you would have seen a lot of teams. You would have hopefully picked up some tips from them. You would have picked up good arguments from them. You change your arguments. So it's just a matter of practicality that you don't have to do it. So don't be too worried if you have weak arguments that you realize how weak they are later on, or the fact that you've missed some strong arguments. But so long as you try your utmost with the research piece, you would be in a good place. So, now we've established the Iraq method. Does anyone have any questions? Everyone clear? Have it ingrained in your brain. Issue, rule, application, conclusion. For every subset, issue, rule, application, conclusion. I said Iraq is the second most important thing. What is the most important thing? We touched upon it earlier today and we mentioned it yesterday. Iraq gives you the structure of how to plead something or how to write it down. The most important thing is what you're actually relying on, which is your sources. You can have something which is badly written but well researched. Admittedly, the research piece is usually more difficult, and if you've got great research, you would inevitably understand how to write it usually. But when you come to writing it, clarity of structure is fantastic. Clarity of argument is fantastic. But at the end of the day, it is the quality of research which will determine how good you are. Try, so far as possible, to stick to the primary sources of international law, which are treaties, custom, general principles. When it comes to writing, I'm sure you have all seen this at least. If you haven't done it yourself, you will have. If this is your piece of paper, it's divided into two parts. You have your substantive arguments, and then you have your footnotes. This shows how much work you've done. Your footnotes are incredibly important. When it comes to anyone reading your memorials, your footnotes are incredibly important. So far as possible, try to have as your first, when you are looking at the footnote, your footnote might not be a single source, it might be multiple sources. You should try to have sources in order of their priority, their importance. If you have an applicable treaty, that goes first. If you're trying to establish a custom where you have to have multiple state practice and opinio juris, goes next. Articles or judicial decisions usually go last. However, in the true principles of common law, what you often end up having is a single judicial decision from the ICJ. It's not ideal, but that is sometimes the case. Do not ever cite Wikipedia. It's just weak. And if I was minded to, and if I was feeling slightly mischievous, I would be tempted to go and edit the Wikipedia entry that you're relying on, and then turn around and say, yeah, your Wikipedia is wrong because it says this. Don't, if at all possible, rely on general texts. Unfortunately, and I'll come to how these memorials are scored right at the end, what a lot of judges do is look at your footnotes. If you have put in Shaw as your reference, not great, because it shows you've read the general text. You haven't read the primary sources. So what you would try to do is rely on Shaw's primary sources. What we talked about yesterday, you follow the footnotes. Shaw hasn't said anything without saying where he's getting it from. Ideally, if you're looking at Brownlee, Brownlee can be cited in some circumstances. He is one of the most renowned publicists. But he is also excellent at footnoting. So, wherever he has said something, he's footnoted it. You can follow his footnotes, read them. I emphasize, read his footnotes, not just the footnote that is written, the actual substance of what it is referring to. Don't just copy and paste his footnotes into your text. Why not? There are two very good reasons, or technically, other than the point of morality, two very good reasons why you shouldn't just copy and paste footnotes across.
We had opposed an opinion of what he stated.
Perfect. That's one of the two. He might not be necessarily quoting what is there. It is his interpretation at times. So be mindful where the author has effectively drawn an interpretation of those facts. If that is the case, then you have to rely on Brownlee. In reference to X, Brownlee says this, and then you quote Brownlee, and you have all the other sources in there as well. What's the other reason why you shouldn't copy and paste footnotes?
There's a computer program anti-plagiarism.
There we go, plagiarism. I know for a fact that in Jessup terms, quite often they're less worried about plagiarizing footnotes. But don't get into the habit of plagiarizing footnotes, because sometimes they decide to be slightly more strict, and you suddenly lose a bucket load of points just because you were too lazy to have a read of these things. So other than the fact that it might not be saying exactly what you think it's saying, because it's his interpretation of what it's saying, you could also be penalized by the fact that you have just copied and pasted it. At the very least, and again, don't take this as the advice. I'm saying worst case scenario, if you really don't have time, if you're really under pressure and you just cannot possibly do it, and it's a very minor point, even if you're going to plagiarize, at least move things around so that it doesn't get picked up by the computer programs. But of course, avoid plagiarizing. How do you cite? Is there a method to citation?
There is a blue book and it's like a guide how to cite.
Blue book. Anything else?
Different
There are two most prominent citation methods. Blue Book is one, which is the Harvard method. There is the Oxford method as the second most prominent one. It doesn't matter which one you follow. The only thing that matters is consistency. All you want to have is the citation which is consistent. If you're going to have the name in italics, followed by the year, followed by the publication, have every one of your footnotes in the same format. Same with the idea of how you're going to structure it. Agree with your teammate how you're going to footnote. Because you need to be consistent across the entire memorial. And if one person is using Blue Book and one person is using Oxford, at the end of it, one of those two has to change. So make sure you are going to be consistent from day one. Every time you read something, every time you're going to rely on something, make sure you write down the footnote at the start. Even if it doesn't make it into your memorial at the end, it is far easier to have that footnote or that reference written down in its complete form at the start, rather than trying to, in the last hour or so, figure out where on earth did I get this from. I need to now figure out what the naming convention for this citation would be. It's just unnecessary hassle. So, as you go along, correctly write down the name, the year, the page number, whatever else it may be of what you're relying on. Where do you footnote something? Is it when you're quoting it, or is it something else? I heard whispering of something else. It's always when you quote something, you footnote it, but not just when you're quoting it. Even if you're relying on something, footnote it. A lot of traditions don't like the fact that this is not my original thought. So I'm going to pretend like it is. Nothing you will say, or not nothing, rarely anything you say will be an original thought. Someone else somewhere has thought of it. And unfortunately, it looks smart to say that, yes, I have read all these other things. I have weighed them. The piece that your original thought comes into it is, I've decided that this guy is much better than the other guy. So it's not harmful to be citing people. It's positive. When it comes to scoring these things, footnotes are always a good thing. So don't shy away from writing down lots and lots and lots of footnotes. If someone says, and you're relying broad terms of, well, Brownlee and Crawford have taken a position on whether a wolf can be a human being. Brownlee in this book at this page. Crawford in this book at this page. You don't have to be exactly quoting what they've said. Is quoting a good idea? That's a very weighted question. Is it?
You might take up a word count space if you use well.
Thank you. If you can avoid it, don't quote. And if you can quote, quote in smaller pieces. What is a Jessup rule? I think it is still a Jessup rule, is anything more than 50 words, you have to what they call block quote. So where this is your text, if this is how you're writing it, when it comes to block quoting, you leave space and you block quote it. Block quoting, so far as possible, should be avoided. Because that's 50 words, not someone else is saying. It's not your interpretation, it's not your analysis, it's just someone else's words. By the way, this is about pleadings. Your summary of facts might be different, your summary of pleadings might be different, it does change. But for pleadings, most importantly, avoid block quoting. don't block quote facts almost ever. And the same when it comes to just quoting facts. Try to limit your factual quotations as much as possible. It's all going to eat up your word count. And word count that is much better used in your pleadings. When it comes to your footnotes, now, this is a difficulty because there is such a thing called string quoting. Has anyone come across that term before? No? String quoting is where you just, otherwise known as, you're padding your footnotes. What you do is you put in 20 sources in your footnote because it looks smart. Everyone says don't do it. I would say don't do it too often because you want to look smart. The whole purpose of a memorial is to look smart. So as much as you avoid unnecessary footnotes, which is going to, again, eat up your word count, you also want to demonstrate how much work you've done, how much research you've done. String quoting is actually necessary when you're trying to establish custom, because you have to cite a state practice and you have to cite the opinion juris. So there's no avoiding it. You have to cite multiple sources in the same footnote. But even when it is not a point of just that, have a look at the previous winning memorials. As much as every single guide in terms of writing Jessup memorials will always tell you, don't string quote, it doesn't look good, it doesn't score well, judges look out for it. Look at the past winning memorials. You will see string quotes in there. Not because necessarily they are absolutely necessary, but they don't equally string quote unnecessary stuff either. So you need to find a balance of where to put in more footnotes. Secondly, when it comes to footnoting, there is a balance to be struck. You don't want to have too few footnotes. I am of the view that you also don't want to have too many footnotes. If you're footnoting 300 odd sources, it just makes me think, really, 300 footnotes. You couldn't find a more. But equally, it is better to have too many footnotes than too few, because again, it demonstrates the level of research you've done. I mentioned the guides on how memorials are marked. The way they look at it is, and they've said these are all 10 to 20 points. So 10 points is because you're getting a minimum of 50, the 20 points is the maximum. The key areas are knowledge of facts and law, proper and articulate analysis, extent and use of research, clarity on organization, and then finally, style, grammar, and citation of sources. These all fit into the idea of how you would mark a memorial. Most memorial judges mark a number of memorials. 20, 30. They're all busy people. They don't always know the specific area of law very thoroughly, but they certainly understand it. How do they mark memorials? Well, by way of a guide, they quite often look at how many sources you have, how long your index of authorities might be, how good the quality of your index of authorities is, as well as your footnotes. Are you relying on Wikipedia, Shaw, Brownlee, treaties, cases from various? All of these things give them an idea of the quality of your research, because quite frankly, they don't have time to look at every single one of your footnotes. Then they look at some of the bigger pieces, more important arguments. So they have an idea of generally what line of argument you've taken. Does it make sense? Does it have any incredibly weak arguments in there? If it does, sorry, You're going to deduct a few more marks there. If no, your arguments are good, they look at some of the more important arguments. And they read them through. And they look at the footnotes that you've relied on. That will determine how well you've structured it and how well you've argued it. When it comes to quick reading, and when it comes to reading something that is dense, that is to say difficult, what you want to do is have simple sentences. Break down your sentences into smaller pieces. There is usually a general rule that is followed, which is you shouldn't have any sentences which is more than about 15 to 20 words in a sentence. Sometimes it's unavoidable, but wherever possible, break down your sentence. Ask yourself the question, do I actually have to have this in there? Because not only will it reduce your word count, it will also reduce the nonsense that you might, as a matter of habit, put in there. There are little phrases that most people like to use because it sounds smart. Something like, as a matter of fact. As a matter of fact, Mr. Wolf is human for 26 days. As a matter of fact itself is entirely redundant. You can just skip it. Mr. Wolf is 20. You're stating a fact. Of course you're stating a fact. Why do you have to say as a matter of fact? That's 5 words that you've wasted. And a sentence that is longer, someone is going to get bored reading it. Conjunctives, things like moreover, in addition. If it is useful, put them in there. But make sure it is actually moreover. Don't just have a random word of moreover. It has to be in addition to something that you said previously. So when it comes to sentence structure, I cannot overemphasize this. Break it down. It might make sense to you because you have been researching it and writing it for months. It might not make sense to someone who's coming at it cold, who doesn't have the same mindset as you. Get someone else to read it. If they don't understand law, even better, because they will just follow the logic of it. They will just follow the structure of how it's been written. As much as this is not quite grammar or spelling or anything that someone more accustomed to English would have to have a look at, this is just pure and simple logic. So anyone can pick up whether the sentence is too long or too short, or whether it makes sense, or whether it's confusing to the reader. Equally, avoid unnecessary foreign languages. By that, I specifically mean Latin. Latin is one of those fantastic things which makes you sound smart. However, as much as I know a bit of Latin, hopefully more than most, I certainly don't know a hell of a lot. When I read it, as much as you might think you were smart for writing it, I will feel stupid for not knowing it when I'm reading it. So, if at all possible, stick to English. If you want to sound smart and use Latin, fine. Give an English translation of it. Some things like jus cogens or erga omnes, which are specific international law principles, you have no choice but to. And I know some people say, when you're saying jus cogens, make sure you actually follow it up by saying peremptory norms. I think that is possibly simplifying it and dumbing it down a little bit too much, because everyone who does international law has to know what jus cogens are. But again, you sometimes have to appeal to the lowest common denominator. But if it is something slightly more convoluted than jus cogens, try to put it in English as well if you're going to have Latin in there. Avoid acronyms. Acronyms confuse you. You don't want it to be, as someone put it, an alphabet soup where it's just acronym after acronym after acronym. Any questions on that so far? Does it make sense? Everyone's gone very quiet again. So I don't know if I'm talking to myself or if I'm actually captivating the audience. No questions?
I have a question on research.
Go for it.
I understand that it's really easy to find like treaties and law, right? And it's kind of easy to find case law and doctrine. But customs is just a bit, what's the easiest way to find
Custom?
established state practice?
Okay, you're getting into more international law that I'm trying actively to avoid.
We kind of need it even for this new.
Technically speaking, custom is impossible to find. Simple as that. I have a fantastic analogy of curry, but I don't know if you guys even eat curry, let alone know what the different stages of curry are. But custom, when you find it, as someone used the expression, it will blow your mind, but you will rarely find it. When it comes to moot court, however, you will rely on anything as custom. Things that will never in the real world be accepted as custom, you will argue as custom. The easiest way to find custom is to find someone who has said it is custom. This comes in primarily from other decisions. ICJ, as much as it is reluctant, will sometimes turn around and say, in our opinion, this is custom. And in order to reach that determination, they will cite something, usually. Commentaries to the various treaties. So if you're relying on a treaty which has not been ratified by both parties, and you're trying to rely on that text of the treaty as custom, will specify the articles on responsibility of states for international wrongful acts, just because I couldn't remember it yesterday, has a commentary which actually says this article is custom because, and it will give you all the examples, or enough examples. If you're trying to rely on something slightly, let's say, more disputed as custom, then the best place to find custom is to find an article that says, in my opinion, this is custom, or this is on its way of becoming custom, because that person will then give you all the various citations. If you don't have any of these, then you are really struggling. And then you have to start looking at specific research into various states. And you have to literally go on to their website of the various foreign office or whichever ministry is responsible. You start with US, UK, China, Russia, through the big countries, the P5, in order to see what their position is on this. Hopefully you should never have to do that. If you're getting to that stage, it means you might want to rethink your argument, because no one has written even an article saying, I think this is custom. But state practice is not easy to find. Opinio juris is even harder to find. And the shortcut to both of them is to rely on where, for example, if you find a domestic court which has said something, you can potentially rely on that as both state practice and opinio juris. So there are little shortcuts, but if you have nothing, it's going to be a mountain to climb, especially for something like a 4-day problem. Does that help at all, or is it just going to confuse you even further? Anything else? Good. Finally, don't ever lose sight of your role. You are acting as the agent for either a state, or in this case, possibly an individual who is bringing a case before an international tribunal. You want to appear proper. It is not a point of usually I say this. It is usually a point of my client or my state or the applicants or the respondents say this. So if at all possible, make sure you use the correct person. In the view of the applicants, blah, 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 blah. The respondents contend, blah, 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 blah. It is going to always look better when you're talking in the proper format than if you say, I think he is not a wolf, rather than, I think he's not a human, rather than, my state submits that he's not a human, or the respondent submits that he's not a human. But equally, that is a secondary choice. Your primary choice is avoid the unnecessary words. The respondent states, he is not a wolf, he is not a human. Cut down the word count, but rely on the formulaic approach ahead of using informal approach of I say this. That is most things that I wanted to cover in terms of legal writing. Have I missed anything that anyone can think of? Because I am pretty sure I've got everything done. So let me have a quick look at my notes. I did miss one thing. Active voice and passive voice. Does everyone understand what an active voice is and what a passive voice is? Active voice is always a preferred choice in anything that you write because it specifically states. For anyone who is in doubt, active voice is. Give me an example of an active voice. Come on, everyone said they understand what an active voice is.
The woodcutter killed the wolf.
I play football. The woodcutter killed the wolf. What is the passive voice for those two? Playing football, well, technically you can't actually have an easy passive voice for that one. The football is played. Easier one is the woodcutter killed the wolf, is the active voice. The passive voice is the werewolf was killed by the woodcutter. No, the werewolf was killed. You want to specify who is doing what. That who is also going to make it easier in terms of making any kind of a pleading, because it will establish who is at fault, who you're blaming, who the onus lies on. So wherever possible, use an active voice. That is, as far as I can think, the majority or the most important points in terms of legal writing. But I will emphasize, always come back, your sources, priorities, IRAC method for clarity and structure. Sources, IRAC. If you're going to take anything away from this entire session is, your sources are important, your hierarchy of sources is important, your IRAC method is important because it will give you the clarity of style and clarity of submission and clarity of structure. Well done. Thank you. Enjoy.